This happened to me last September doing seasonal fieldwork in Kentucky. I still don't have an explanation, and honestly, I've stopped looking for one. The first trail camera we pulled had a photo on it from 3:47 a.m. of a man standing about 4 feet from the lens, not doing anything, just standing there looking straight into it. No animal, no timestamp glitch, just a guy, soaking wet, in the middle of a forest where the nearest paved road was 6 miles away. My coworker Colin looked at it for a long time and said, "That's probably just a hunter." Neither of us believed that. We didn't say anything else about it for 2 days. I should back up. I was 26 that summer, kind of drifting between jobs the way you do when you graduated with a biology degree and no plan. I'd worked retail, I'd done a stint as a lab tech that didn't pan out, and then I saw a posting from the State Fish and Wildlife Office for a seasonal field technician position. 9 days on, 5 off, helping maintain a grid of trail cameras for a black bear population study in one of the national forests in eastern Kentucky. Pay wasn't great, but it included a stipend for gas and gear, and I needed to get out of my apartment and my own head for a while. My cousin had died that spring, nothing dramatic, just cancer, just too young. And I wanted to be somewhere that wasn't full of reminders. The job itself was simple. There were about 60 cameras spread across a research grid, mounted on trees along a rough grid pattern that covered maybe 40 square miles of forest, ridge, and hollow country, thick with rhododendron and second-growth oak. Every camera needed new batteries every couple weeks, and the SD cards needed to be swapped and logged. You'd hike to a camera, note the GPS coordinates, swap the card, check the mount, and move to the next one. It sounds boring, and mostly it was. You'd walk 8 to 12 miles a day depending on the terrain. Camp overnight at pre-scouted sites since the grid was too big to do in a day trip, and repeat for 9 days before rotating back to town for your days off. I was paired with a grad student named Colin who was doing his thesis on black bear denning behavior. He was maybe 24, from Ohio, wiry. The kind of guy who'd been camping since he was 5 and never shut up about knots and water filtration systems. He was easy to be around. Talked a lot, but never about anything that required me to talk back, which honestly worked for me that summer. Our supervisor was a wildlife biologist named Denise who stayed at the ranger station and handled the radio checks. We were supposed to call in every evening at 7 p.m. on a handheld radio, just a, quote, "we're fine, here's our location" type thing, standard protocol for anyone doing overnight fieldwork alone in the backcountry. The first 4 days were completely normal. I want to be clear about that because I think it matters. We fell into a rhythm. Wake up around 6, coffee from a little propane stove, hike to the first camera cluster, swap cards, eat lunch on a ridge somewhere, keep moving, set up camp before dark, radio check, sleep, repeat. We saw actual bears twice from a distance, which was the most exciting thing that happened. We saw deer, wild turkey, once a bobcat that just stared at us from a rock for a full minute before wandering off like we were beneath its notice. It was peaceful in a way I hadn't felt in months. I remember writing in my phone notes on day 3 that this was exactly what I needed. Day 5 is when the man photo showed up, on a camera near a place called Salt Lick Hollow, which is a real name. I'm not being cute about it. Colin's theory about a hunter made sense on paper. People do hunt in that section, though not usually that late at night, and not standing that close to a camera that was mounted 8 feet up a tree, which would mean the guy was staring almost straight up at it, or the angle was off or something. We logged it, moved on. You get weird photos on trail cams all the time. Raccoons that look like ghosts. Branches that look like faces. I'd seen enough camera trap data from my old lab job to know your brain fills in patterns that aren't there. That night, though, something small happened that I didn't think much of at the time. I woke up around 2 a.m. because I heard footsteps outside the tent. Slow, deliberate circling. I figured it was a deer, or maybe the bear we'd seen earlier that day wandered close to camp because we hadn't hung our food bag far enough away. I unzipped the tent flap just enough to look and didn't see anything. No eye shine, nothing moving, The footsteps had stopped the second I moved. I told myself it was a deer that spooked when it heard me. I went back to sleep. In the morning, our food bag, which we'd hung from a rope over a branch about 30 feet from the tent, standard bear bagging, was on the ground. Not torn open, not raided, just untied and set neatly on the ground next to the tree, like someone had lowered it down carefully instead of a bear tearing the rope apart, which is what a bear does. They don't untie knots. Colin thought maybe the knot had just slipped. I remember tying that knot myself. A clove hitch I'd been tying the same way for 5 days without issue. I didn't push it. I didn't want to be the guy who turns a slipped knot into a ghost story on day 5 of a 9-day trip. Day 6, we found the second trail camera in that section had been turned. Not knocked down, not vandalized, just rotated about 40 degrees so it was no longer facing the game trail it was supposed to monitor, but facing instead into a denser stand of trees, where there wasn't a trail at all. Camera traps do get bumped by animals sometimes. Bears especially like to rub against the trees they're mounted on. But this camera was mounted with a security cable and a padlocked bracket specifically so it couldn't be easily bumped. That was part of the study design because of past theft issues with hunters stealing gear. Someone had unlocked it. We had the only 2 keys. Well, we had 2 of the 3 keys. Denise had the 3rd back at the station. Maybe Denise came out and reset something, Colin said. It was possible. Denise did sometimes do spot checks. We radioed that evening and asked her. She said she hadn't been anywhere near that section in 3 weeks. I want to be honest that at this point I wasn't scared, more just annoyed and a little unsettled the way you get when something doesn't add up and you can't stop turning it over. Colin seemed similarly bothered, but neither of us said the word that was starting to sit in the back of my head, which was that someone was out there with us, moving around our camp and our cameras, and doing it carefully enough not to get caught. Day 7 was when it stopped being something I could explain away. We were hiking a stretch along a ridge trail to get to the next cluster of cameras, maybe 2 miles from where we'd camped the night before. And Colin stopped walking and said, "Do you hear that?" I didn't hear anything at first, and then I did. It was a sound like someone calling a name, far off, distorted by the terrain, so I couldn't tell whose name or even if it was a name. Just that rhythm and pitch. 2 syllables, rising at the end, like a question. We stood there for a solid minute listening. It happened again, from a different direction than the first time, which didn't make sense unless there were 2 of them, or unless it was echoing off the hollow in a way that was messing with our sense of direction. Colin, who, I want to remind you, had spent his whole life camping and was not an anxious person, got noticeably pale and said we should keep moving. Neither of us called out in response, which, in hindsight, was the right call, though at the time it just felt instinctive, like some part of my brain that predates language was telling me not to answer. That night, we made camp closer together than we'd been doing, both tents practically touching, and I slept with my knife unzipped from its sheath next to me, which felt stupid and also felt necessary. Around midnight, I woke up to my phone buzzing, which shouldn't have happened because we had 0 signal out there, confirmed multiple times over the trip. It was a text message notification stuck mid-send from 4 days earlier. One I'd apparently tried to send to my mom, and it had just now gone through some delayed queue. No big deal. That happens with spotty service sometimes. But the screen light woke me up enough that I noticed something through the mesh of the tent. There was a shape standing at the tree line, maybe 30 yards off, not moving, just standing there facing our camp. I want to be careful here because it was dark and I was half asleep, and I do think fear plays tricks on you. But I watched it for close to 2 minutes, and in that time it did not move at all. Not a sway, not a shift of weight. Nothing a person standing still for that long would naturally do. Then a cloud must have moved because the moonlight shifted, and when I looked again I couldn't find the shape anymore. I didn't wake Colin. I don't fully know why. I think some part of me didn't want it to be real, and if I woke him and he saw it too, it would be real. In the morning, I told him anyway. He didn't laugh it off this time. He just got quiet and said maybe we should radio Denise and ask to be pulled early. We tried the radio. Got nothing but static, which had never happened before. We'd had solid comms the whole trip on that model. It was rated for way farther than we were from the base repeater. Day 8 is when we found the camera. We were checking a unit near a rock outcrop we'd nicknamed Table Rock because it was flat and wide, a spot we'd actually eaten lunch at on day 2. The SD card slot was open, and the card was missing, which had never happened. Cameras don't eject their own cards. But what got both of us was what was on the little screen display. The camera had a small preview LCD for checking shot angle. It was showing the last image taken, because apparently whoever pulled the card hadn't powered the unit off. The image was of our tent. Our actual tent from the campsite we'd used 2 nights before, at night, taken from what looked like standing distance, close enough that you could see the seam of the rainfly, the little reflective guy line we'd tied. You couldn't see inside, but it was unmistakably our camp, unmistakably taken while we were sleeping in it. I remember Colin sat down right there on Table Rock and didn't say anything for a while. I didn't either. There wasn't really anything to say. Somebody had taken one of our own cameras, walked it to our sleeping campsite, photographed us, and then carried it out to this second location and left the SD card gone, but the camera itself sitting there, powered on, screen, showing us exactly what they wanted us to see. We decided right then to cut the trip short and head for the nearest trailhead, which, according to the map, was about 7 miles southeast. A longer route than backtracking the way we'd come, but one that avoided the hollow where we'd heard the calling sound. Denise wouldn't be expecting us until the next scheduled radio check that evening, but we figured getting to a road and getting cell signal was more important than sticking to protocol. The walkout started fine, if fast and tense. About 3 miles in, following an old logging track that was marked on our topo map but badly overgrown, Colin's ankle rolled on a loose rock and he went down hard. Not broken, we determined that pretty quickly, but a bad sprain, the kind that swells up within minutes and makes putting weight on it genuinely painful. We were maybe 4 miles from the trailhead at that point with no reliable way to call for help. I remember feeling a very specific, cold kind of panic, not the jump scare kind, more like a slow realization that we were now moving at a third of our previous speed through terrain where something had been tracking us for 2 days. We rigged a hiking pole into a crutch and kept going. It took almost 4 hours to cover what should have taken 90 minutes. Somewhere in there, maybe 2 miles from the trailhead, we passed close to an old structure neither of us had known was on the map. A collapsed fire lookout tower, the kind the Forest Service used to staff decades ago before they switched to aerial surveillance, mostly abandoned across the country now. This one wasn't on any of our official maps, which struck me as odd even in the moment. We'd studied that grid pretty carefully. The base of it was maybe 40 feet from the track we were following, tucked behind a stand of hemlocks that mostly hid it unless you were looking right at it. I told Colin to wait, that I wanted to check it fast. Mostly because I was thinking if there was any chance of getting a cell signal, it might be from higher ground. And also because, at that point, some stubborn part of me needed to know what was going on, rather than just running from it. He didn't love the idea, but he also couldn't really walk right then. So he sat against a tree and I went up. The tower structure itself was mostly rotted through, unsafe to climb, but there was a small outbuilding at its base, a supply shed, door hanging half off its hinges. Inside, nailed to every wall, floor to ceiling, were photographs. Hundreds of them. Trail camera photos, the same kind our study used, printed out on regular paper, curling with moisture damage, but clearly recent in places and clearly old in others. Some faded to almost nothing. Hikers, hunters, a woman in running gear, a family with kids, the youngest maybe 7. 2 guys who looked like they were doing exactly what we were doing. Gear vests, GPS units clipped to their packs. Dozens and dozens of people, all photographed the same way ours had been, close range, at night. taken from just outside where they thought they were alone. In the corner, there was a notebook warped from moisture, and I only flipped through a few pages before I heard Colin yelling my name from outside, which honestly might be the only reason I'm writing this post right now instead of something worse having happened. The pages I saw had names, or partial names, dates going back what looked like almost 15 years. And next to a lot of them, not all, but a lot, a single word, gone. I didn't have time to process what that meant. I grabbed nothing. I didn't take a photo, which I regret and also don't regret, because I was purely focused on getting out of that shed and back to Colin. We didn't talk about it much on the rest of the walkout. There wasn't time, and honestly, there wasn't the emotional bandwidth. We made it to the trailhead a little before dark, got one bar of signal in the parking lot, called Denise, who sent someone to pick us up within the hour. Here's the part that I know makes this sound like it's building to something bigger than it actually delivered, and I'm sorry for that, but it's the truth. We reported everything. The shed, the photos, the notebook, the camera, all of it. Forest Service law enforcement went out there within a couple days. When they got to the coordinates I gave them, the shed had burned. Not our doing, we were nowhere near it after we left. They found scorched ground, some warped nails, no readable photographs left, nothing. They couldn't even confirm the notebook had existed. Denise believed us, I think, but there wasn't much she could do with a burned structure and two exhausted seasonal techs as the only witnesses. I finished out the season somewhere else. A different grid. Farther south. Nothing happened there. Nothing at all. Which honestly made the whole thing feel more surreal, like it had happened to someone else. Colin finished his thesis. We don't really talk anymore, not because of any falling out, just the way people drift after a shared job ends. About 4 months ago, so almost a year after all this, I got an envelope in the mail at my current address, no return label, postmarked from a town about 30 miles from that forest. Inside was a single printed photo. It was me, from behind, walking away down that logging track the day we hiked out. Colin visible ahead of me, limping on his makeshift crutch. Time-stamped in the corner, the kind of timestamp a trail camera automatically burns into the image. The date matched. The time was about 20 minutes before we would have reached the trailhead. There's no note on it, no message, just that. I called the number for the local sheriff's office out there, and they took a report, which I don't think went anywhere, and honestly, I don't blame them. What am I asking them to investigate exactly? I still have the photo. I haven't shown it to Colin. I don't really know why. I think some part of me doesn't want to make it real for him again, the way it's real for me now. I don't hike anymore. Not out that way. Not really anywhere alone. I know that's probably an overreaction to what could be explained 100 boring ways. A prankster. A weird recluse who likes photographing hikers and playing games. Nothing that actually proves anyone was ever in danger. But I keep thinking about that word next to some of those names in the notebook. And I keep thinking about the fact that whoever sent me that envelope knew exactly where I live now. A full year and 2 states away from where any of this happened. And I never told anyone that address except my landlord and my mom.